Progressive Democrats in this country are pursuing domestically an appeasement policy, and it's very dangerous. Now, the key word here is appeasement policy. Individual instances of appeasement may actually be justified. There can be, and there usually are, rational reasons put forth for those individual acts. The problem with the policy is that if you string different acts of appeasement together, what you're doing is conditioning the group that you're dealing with, whether it's a country or a protest group or protest groups, to believe that they'll be rewarded. That the more violently they protest, the more vehement they are, the more likely they are to gain something. Maybe not everything they want, but some of what they want. So basically what you're doing is conditioning them to keep going. I said if you had a cat that every morning came to the door at the crack of dawn and started clawing at your door and whining, and you opened the door and gave the cat a treat, if that's looked at individually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if a cat comes to the door the second day and you give him another treat, and the third day and you give him another treat, now you're conditioning the cat to keep coming to the door at the crack of dawn every morning, which isn't the behavior that you want. Now with individuals, with people, with human beings, with countries, or within countries, these policies can be very dangerous. You know, the problem with appeasement wasn't Munich per se. The problem was the string of policies from 1934 on that conditioned Adolf Hitler to believe he could get away with almost anything and that the Allies wouldn't respond. And on September 1st, 1939, he invaded Poland, and much to his surprise, England and France declared war on him, because it was a break from the appeasement policy. He had been conditioned to believe he could get away with things. That's why he kept going and he kept pushing. Because every time he pushed, no matter how far he pushed, he got away with it. Even when he grabbed the rest of Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1939, England and France didn't declare war on Germany. They offered a guarantee to Poland, which led him to think he could get away with doing that too. So that's the problem with an appeasement policy, and it's one that's being pursued today in this country by progressive Democrats. As I said, if you look at Munich individually, there were rationales for giving the Sudetenland, which was occupied mostly by Germans, to Hitler. But if you look at the policy of appeasement that the Western Allies had followed from 1934, you can see the dangers. When Hitler renounced Versailles, they did nothing. When he announced that he was rearming in violation of Versailles, they did nothing. In fact, the British signed a naval treaty with him to basically allow him to do what he was doing anyway. When he reoccupied the Rhineland, they did nothing. When he grabbed Austria, they did nothing. When he wanted the Sudetenland, not only did they do nothing, they actively gave it to him, hoping to appease him even further. And then when he took the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939, they still didn't declare war. They guaranteed the territorial integrity of Poland, just as they had at Munich guaranteed the rest of the territorial integrity of Czechoslovakia, and then done nothing to support that. So what was Hitler to think when he was thinking about invading Poland? That if he did this, he was going to bring on a widespread European war? Or did he think there was a good chance the British and the French would just back down again, just as they had when he seized all of Czechoslovakia? So it's not the instance of appeasement that's the problem. It's the policy of appeasement. If you keep stringing out all these instances, you're basically conditioning people to believe that they can get away with whatever it is that they want to get away with. That's why, in my view, what the Democrats, progressive Democrats, are doing domestically today is helping to allow this country to drift into civil war, because they're conditioning people to think that they can get away with whatever it is that they want to get away with. So they're not going to push less. They're going to push more because they keep getting rewarded for pushing. I mean, what have they been doing in response to, not the protests? Protests are fine. They're constitutionally protected. But what happens when the protests devolve into rioting, looting, and in some cases arson? What have the Democrats done? They've, on the whole, if you look at most of the cities, they pull the police back to avoid dangerous confrontations. Now, what's the signal to not the protesters, but to the rioters, looters, and arsonists? Keep going. Nothing's going to happen. You probably won't even be prosecuted, especially if you run around with a mask on or a helmet with your face covered. I mean, some people have been prosecuted, but how many thousands of people have participated in these riots? What percentage of people are actually being arrested and pursued legally? So they back off, they pull the police out, and then what do? They write banners in streets celebrating Black Lives Matter, trying to buy them off and pander to them so that maybe they'll be happy and they won't keep doing what they're doing, which isn't working. They talk about defunding the police. They talk about, in Minneapolis, getting rid of the police department. All they're doing is telling the protesters, keep pushing, keep asking for more, and you'll get it. Arrest cops, discipline cops who, when things get out of hand. But do you see them disciplining rioters when they get out of hand? Looters when they get out of hand? Arsonists when they get out of hand? No, it's only the police who are ever disciplined. It's never the protesters or rioters or anybody else. It's never the politicians who make bad decisions. And Seattle's the perfect example. What's going on in Seattle? In Seattle, there were protests which devolved into riots, looting, some arson. What did the mayor do? Pull the police back. Try to avoid confrontation. She pulls them out of a precinct. The protesters and rioters take over what they're called, whatever you call it, Chaz, CHOP, whatever you want to call it, this autonomous zone in the middle of Seattle. Does the mayor do anything? No. In fact, quite the opposite. When she's interviewed on TV, she said it's going to be a summer of love. It's just like a summer street festival. She provides them with porta potties. And when they're filled, she sends the city in to drain them. The electricity keeps flowing into the area. The water keeps flowing into the area. We don't want to make these people uncomfortable. So they don't leave. And then over the last two weekends, the shooting started. And who's getting killed? White people? No. Black people. Black Lives Matter. We're told Black Lives Matter, and black people are getting killed. Young black people, young black men are getting killed in that zone. And finally, she decides she needs to do something. I think it was last Tuesday night. I'm recording this on Tuesday. And I was thinking it was about a week ago, a couple hours from now. She said she was going to take care of it. She was going to do something. And a week later, what has she done? She's talked to them. She sent in counselors, tried to convince them to leave. And what have they done up to this point? They said, hell no, we won't go. And then, in a protest led by a city council member, they marched to her house, the mayor's mansion or wherever she's living, to protest there. Which are not even, nobody's supposed to know where that is because this woman has received death threats in the past from people on the right for things she's done. So they were keeping her at least home address and hiding to protect not just her, but her family. This woman has a family, the mayor has a family. And they out her location, which means if there are right-wing lunatics who want to go and kill her or blow up her house, now they know where to go. Thanks to the protesters. And they protest outside her home. So what's she doing today? I checked before I started recording. She sent in heavy equipment from the city to start removing some of the barricades. But as quickly as they're taking down the barricades, they're dragging the people in the autonomous zone, or dragging out couches and chairs and whatever else they can find to build new barricades behind the old ones. They don't seem like they're giving up. So, at what point is she just going to keep doing this? How long is that going to take? How many more people will die? I mean, more people have been shot and killed in the autonomous zone than died on that street in Minneapolis several weeks ago when George Floyd died. That was one man died. How many black men have died in the autonomous zone already? More than one. And several have been shot, some of them still critically. What's the sense of all this? What does she think she's doing? Why is she surprised that they're not giving in? She's been conditioning them to believe that she'll continue to fold. She's folded, 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 folded. And now all of a sudden she wants them to be worried and take her seriously that she means business. They're not buying it. And that's the problem with an appeasement policy. Just as in September 1939, when Neville Chamberlain started talking tough after March 1939, when Hitler, rolled into Prague, Hitler didn't take him seriously. The Nazis didn't take him seriously. Because Hitler had been conditioned to believe that they would keep folding. So even when they talked tough, they just ignored it. And they went ahead and invaded Poland. The problem here is it isn't just Seattle. This is going on in basically every city controlled by progressive Democrats across the country. New York, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, Atlanta, Baltimore, you name it. Any place they're in control, they keep yielding. They keep giving up ground. They keep pulling the police back, restraining the police to avoid confrontations, which is nice and sounds fine. But what they're doing is, again, conditioning these people to believe that they should keep pushing. Why stop? We'll just keep getting more. The more we push, the more we'll get. And it's not like the cops are going to come out and start shooting us. I mean, many of these cities are not able to use anymore tear gas or other non-lethal rubber bullets and stuff like that, which is fine. So what's that? If a cop gets in a confrontation, what does he have? A wooden stick and a gun. So if you get one of these dangerous confrontations developing, where the police are told not to pull back and to hold their ground, and they're under assault, the only thing they're left to do, especially if they're outnumbered, they can't beat them off with sticks, billy clubs, is shoot them. This is like an invitation, a crazy, misconceived invitation for violent confrontation. If you take away non-lethal weapons from the police and only leave them with lethal weapons, what the hell do you think is going to happen if they get caught in a confrontation? It's only a good policy if you have resolved never to get into a confrontation with protesters. But that means you're constantly just going to back off, and let them do whatever it is that they want to do as they go about, in some cases, destroying whole sections of your city. And we can see these people starting to spread out. And, they've gone into Beverly Hills. They've gone into wealthy areas of St. Louis. They're not just staying in their own neighborhoods anymore. They're starting to spread out. And people are getting outraged. And people are buying guns. I think the number in May was 1.5 or 1.75 million, 1,750,000 guns were sold in 1 month. And none of these are progressive Democrats buying all these guns. These are the people like we saw in St. Louis with the AR-15 out there trying to protect his property. And we're seeing more and more of that around the country. This is all dangerous, very dangerous signs of where we're headed. That's why I said progressive Democrats are appeasing these groups and leading us ever more closely to the brink of civil war. It's unfortunate that we find ourselves in a position now that if someone miscalculates, Could be police, could be a government official, a mayor, a governor, could be the protesters. If there's some miscalculation made, as there often is in human interaction, a misjudgment, a misappreciation of what the other side is telling you, we could have a very violent confrontation. And what happens if it starts in Seattle? Could happen anywhere, but if it happens in Seattle, just use Seattle as an example because it seems to be more out of control there than some other places. What if the protesters respond somewhere else and it starts spreading from Seattle to St. Louis to Chicago to New York to Philadelphia to Atlanta, just as the riots themselves spread? I mean, you can't say that it can't spread because we know that the riots spread. They started in Minneapolis and they spread across the country. If there's a violent confrontation somewhere caused by a miscalculation on the part of the protesters or the authorities, it could spread. That's how civil wars get triggered. That's how the American Revolution broke out. Similar drift before the American Civil War. Lincoln's elected in November. South Carolina secedes from the Union in December 1860. James Buchanan, probably the worst president we've ever had in this country, fortunately for my home state, Pennsylvania, does nothing. And in those days, the president didn't come in January. He wasn't inaugurated until March. So as southern states leave the Union in December and January and February and March, Buchanan does nothing. And basically, he's appeasing the Confederate States. He doesn't want a confrontation. But of course, his failure to act against South Carolina leads other states to think they can get away with it too. And before you know it, you've got some crazed secessionists in South Carolina firing at Fort Sumter. Lincoln is now there. And it's a whole new ballgame. Basically, in many ways, the Southerners had been conditioned to believe they could just keep pushing and taking, and eventually the North would give up. Go home. Yield. They had been conditioned by Buchanan to believe that. They were wrong, because Buchanan is replaced by Lincoln, and Lincoln is a very different person. And when they miscalculate, and remember what happens to the Confederacy. They lose, and they lose badly. They last longer maybe than they should have, but they still lose in the end. Their entire way of life is destroyed. They miscalculated when they bombarded Fort Sumter. Why did they miscalculate? Because up to that point, the federal government hadn't done anything. Buchanan didn't even want to reinforce the forts. A couple of them had been abandoned already. So they fired Fort Sumter, that'll probably be abandoned, which it was. But by then Lincoln adopted a different policy. So we sort of blundered into the Civil War. If Buchanan had taken stern action maybe against South Carolina in December, maybe things would have turned out differently. That's the problem with appeasement policies, not appeasement actions, appeasement policies. And that's what we're looking at today. If you got something out of this video, please leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button so you'll know when I post new videos. And until the next time, I am out of here.